Well, Donald Trump and his kids are holding a news conference next Thursday to announce plans to remove himself from the family business. He says he wants to focus just on the presidency and he'll leave the business for the kids to run. Now, here's how he explains it, of course, using Twitter. Quote, I feel it is visually important as president to in no way have a conflict of interest with my various businesses. Hence, legal documents being crafted, which will take me completely out of business operations. The presidency is a far more important task, exclamation point. But of course, nobody knows what will be in those legal documents, and since Trump has not released his tax returns to date, we do not know much about his finances, let alone his business interests. But we do know that Trump's kids will be in charge, and that could pose a whole lot of conflicts of interest. When Ivanka joined Dad in a meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, it raised a lot of eyebrows. Now it's also even raising more questions. Her company negotiating a licensing deal with a Japanese apparel company whose biggest shareholder is, wait for it, the Japanese government. Then there are the boys, Don Jr. and Eric. They're working on a tower in Manila, and they just met this guy. His name, Jose Antonio. He's a major developer in the Philippines and a partner in the very project. Also, he just happens to have been appointed by the Philippine president as a special envoy to the United States. And I could go on for an hour with more examples, but the opportunities for conflict are clearly everywhere. Many are comparing Trump to former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Berlusconi, if you may remember, a media mogul who led Italy for a total of 9 years, and he fought to keep his holdings even while running the country. Norman Eisen, a lawyer and a special ethics advisor to the Obama administration, explains it this way, quote, it is shocking that we're even having a conversation comparing Trump to Berlusconi and his antecedent strongman of Italy, a long line that runs all the way back to Caesar. I guess we'll all be relieved if he turns out to be Berlusconi and not Mussolini. And Mr. Eisen is now a visiting professor at the Brookings Institution, and he's kind enough to join us now. Ambassador, thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let me ask you what you think we're going to hear on the 15th, and I put it in context because Donald Trump kind of, I think, tipped his hand a little bit when he said, hey, the law's totally on my side. The president can't have a conflict of interest. First of all, is he right? And second of all, what do you think we'll actually see on the 15th?
Well, the president-elect is wrong. It is not true that the president cannot have a conflict of interest. In fact, the founders of our country were so concerned that they wrote a conflict of interest law into the United States Constitution. It's called the Emoluments Clause, but that's just a fancy 18th century word that means the President of the United States is not permitted to receive anything of value, any benefit, monetary, licenses, permits, trademarks from a foreign government. And of course, the reason they were worried about that was the conflict that is created when you have a President of the United States who's supposed to be doing the best thing for the United States and for all of its people, who's also getting a stream of benefits from a foreign government. It raises the question, who is the president serving? In terms of what he's likely to do on the 15th, I think he sent us a signal, and unfortunately, if he follows through, it's not going to be enough. The signal he sent was in his tweets announcing December 15th, he'll have an announcement on his businesses. He said, I'm going to exit operations. Well, that only means the day-to-day management of the businesses. What he should do, what every president has done for the past 4 decades, is to also exit his business interests through using a blind trust or the equivalent. That means you turn everything over to an independent professional trustee, not a family member, and the trustee then liquidates your known holdings, takes the money and buys stuff behind a wall. You don't know what it is, what your investments are that the trustee is managing, so you, as president, don't have a conflict.
And just so everyone knows, historically, it's not like this is an unfair burden being put on him. Predecessors of both parties have done this as well, and everybody knew this was coming down the pike when he announced he was running for president a couple of years ago. This is not out of left field, but I have 50 examples I could do, but let's just use one for the audience. Talk about The Trump International Hotel in Washington is a perfect example where even if it wasn't the intent on the part of the Trumps to leverage their office to line their pockets, intentionally or otherwise, it could be a conflict of interest writ large.
The Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from the White House, is one of the portals through which these international financial conflicts flow in violation of the Constitution come January 20th, as soon as he takes his office. And the reason is because you have foreign governments who are lining up around the block to do business with that hotel, and one of them has made very clear why. He was quoted in the newspaper, this foreign official, as saying, "When I go to see the president, I want to be able to tell him, I love your new hotel." So, but there's a more profound problem than that. It's not only this constitutional conflict. The contract for the hotel says no party to this contract can benefit if they're a government official. I'm paraphrasing the legalese, but it seems that Donald Trump can't be a party to his own contract. So that's a second area of conflict. And here's the third and the most profound of the conflicts relating to this hotel, perhaps, is the one that arises from the fact that Donald Trump is going to be on both sides of the hotel lease. Obviously, he's responsible for the hotel currently as the lessee. He's the one whose businesses are occupying this government-owned business. But come January 20th, he's also going to be at the top of the chain of responsibility as the lessor. That's because the United States owns the property. The United States is the other party to the lease. So when you have the same person who is ultimately responsible for both sides of the lease, that's the opposite of an arm's length transaction. It is a conflict waiting to happen.
Let's go, if we can, Norman, to Italy. And later in the program, we'll be talking with my guests about the important vote that happened over this weekend and maybe more dominoes to fall in Europe. But let's go back to Silvio Berlusconi. I got family over there, and they said, guys, get ready for an interesting ride, because just like Berlusconi, Trump put his kids in power. He didn't divest, and he, more than Trump, controlled basically all the media that there was, at least on the broadcast side in Italy, and there was one corrupting after another. The idea of a business magnate coming in there, he'd clean up Rome, didn't work out that way. Give a little bit of an idea what we learned from his 9 years in power and some of the things that could happen here stateside.
The big lessons of Berlusconi for the United States are, number one, Berlusconi was, like Donald Trump, a brilliant manipulator, master of getting media attention. Number two, Trump is actually a more profound threat than Berlusconi to the proper governance of the United States, because Berlusconi's interests, not exclusively, but primarily, were domestic. Trump's interests are international. Berlusconi, number three, was very effective but disreputable in operating the office. It's one thing to have a reckless driver in an Alfa Romeo, but Donald Trump is taking on an enormous amount of additional responsibility. It's the difference between a dangerous driver in a sports car and one driving an 18-wheel rig loaded with nuclear weapons. It's very, very alarming, and I think it's the Berlusconi situation on steroids.
Last thing from me, and I'm going to read you what Trump said about this issue, and then tell me if you think he's right, unfortunately, or you think that he's misreading being a president-elect versus when you're president. He said, "The only people who care about this are the crooked media who makes these conflicts a big deal." Does he have a better read than you and me about what the public cares and doesn't care about? Or, you know, is he going to be surprised here that inevitably he's going to have to answer this question?
History teaches us that the American people do care deeply about integrity in government, and that they respond viscerally when there are scandals. And we've seen presidency after presidency in both parties in recent years veering off the rails when these scandals occur, whether it's the mother of them all, Watergate, or the Lewinsky matter in the Clinton administration. So I do think that people will care once there are specific scandals. Whether you voted for Mr. Trump or not, we're all Americans. He's our president, and we want to see him succeed in following the Constitution, in following constitutional values, and in doing what's best for all of the United States and the world.
Well, we're going to find out soon enough. Ambassador, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Anytime. I'm pleased to do it.
Up next, Donald Trump, he's continuing to slam the media and tweet like crazy about whatever seems to come to mind. The question is, will that fly once he's not president-elect, but the actual president? Washington Post media columnist. She'll get into that after this.